Next up, and I'm very, very excited to announce this next speaker because at my MBA school, I got excused from Teams class today explicitly because there's somebody talking about Teams, and that somebody is none other than Melanie Yencken. Melanie is the UX leader and manager of the Google My Business team across the UK and US. In her past roles, she has built and led UX teams globally at startups, Shibsted and eBay. Sorry, that's a tongue twister for me. In her spare time, Melanie is the founder and coordinator of London Tech Ladies, a women's network with 4,500 plus members. Melanie focuses London Tech Ladies events on soft skill development, striving to develop and inspire women to move up the career ladder and create more gender diversity in the upper levels of management. So for a talk on building inclusive UX team culture, please welcome Melanie Yencken to the Impact stage at Techsylvania.
Hello, can you hear me? Great, I can see that. I think that's working now.
All good, Melanie.
Thank you for that intro, Trevor. I'm loving the energy. Now let me just share my screen so you guys can see my content. Great, that seems to all be working well. Well, nice to see you all. I'm joining you here from not so sunny California. You'll probably see the sunrise slowly in the background while we're talking today. I'm super excited to talk to you all about building inclusive team culture. So let's jump into my presentation today. So just a little intro for myself. I mean, I can't beat Trevor's intro, but yeah, I'm Mel Yencken. As you just heard, I lead design teams at Google, working specifically on a product called Google My Business, which enables businesses to get their presence on Google Search and Maps. And in my spare time, I also founded and helped lead a network called London Tech Ladies. So it's great to be here all and to join you. So today we're going to be talking about inclusion. And this is a really important topic to me, but people always want to know what does inclusion actually mean. So for me, it means when everyone's unique identity and experiences are respected, valued, and fully integrate into how we operate as a team and as an organization. So it's important because the differences that we have as individuals help improve culture and collaboration and innovation. And then all of that flows into improving our products and services because we have those unique views and perspectives when we're building something to make sure that it's going to meet the needs of a broad spectrum of people out in the world. And just a little shout out to all the illustrations I'm using throughout this presentation. If I just go back one slide, you can see here, they're inclusive illustrations from humans.com, which is an amazing resource, trying to make presentations inclusive over here as well. So let's keep going. So if we look at the reality today, and this is an amazing report, this might be a little bit of text overload for you, but just a little plug to McKinsey's Women in the Workplace report. This is the latest view of the corporate pipeline by gender and race from 2020. And you can clearly see that once you move past entry level, that the representation of women, and especially women of color and men of color, becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. Although we have seen some improvement with the focus on improving diversity in the workplace, there's still a long way for us to go. And this report is fantastic. They republish it every year, and it's built up from data from like 600 companies who employ more than 22 million people, primarily in the US, but it gives us a good benchmark. So when you drill into this data, what I'm interested about is that there's something really going wrong from that entry level onwards. And what we're seeing that for every 100 men who are promoted, only 85 women are promoted, and just 71 Latina women and 58 Black women. So there is an experience of this broken rung, and this step up to manager is kind of the biggest obstacle that people from minority backgrounds face on the path to leadership. Women are significantly outnumbered at the manager level, and at the beginning of 2020, they held just 38% of manager positions, while men held about 62%. So then that again makes it harder if you don't see fair representation at the management level for people who would enable these promotions to happen fairly. So I'm going to talk today about the role of a manager and the role of a leader to actually build inclusion into the team. To me, this is super important because the manager, you know that it's important to model kind of your behaviors on a daily basis for your team, and that the behavior of the manager becomes the template and the role model for others in the team. They literally will mirror what they see their managers and leaders doing, and that can be both consciously and subconsciously as well. And the fact that managers and every individual in an organization has biases. We all have grown up with those. The way we've grown up in society has caused us to have bias, and that will change how a manager allocates work, how they think about individuals, how they favor people, and there'll be a number of ways that biases can come through. So it's important that we keep those checked. I'll cover that today. And the reality is that employees experience the company through their manager. Like, that is the direct culture that they have within their group. Like, yes, the company at the higher level can set, this is our culture and this is what we do, but the daily experience for that employee will be largely influenced by what is being set up within their direct team culture by their manager. So I have kind of 3 pillars that I like to talk about to summarize some of the key things that I do and have kind of built up over the last 12 years as a manager around how I try to build inclusion into the team. The first pillar here is around trust and respect. So I'm going to dive into this a little bit more. So what does team trust and respect really mean? To me, this means psychological safety. So at Google, most of a Googler's work is done in teams. And so there was a team in our people operations group who set out to kind of understand whether certain team dynamics and individual characteristics of team members were highly associated with effective teams, so that then they could kind of remodel those team dynamics. And when they did this study, they went and looked at so many different factors, and the psychological safety was the most important and the foundational of these dynamics that they found that could characterize an effective team. So you might be wondering, like, what does psychological safety actually mean? There's a great speaker about this, Amy Edmondson. I'm going to quote her here, and she's got a YouTube talk called Psychological Safety in the Workplace. So please go and check her out. But she describes it as the best performing teams make the most mistakes because they're able to talk about them with honesty. And when issues arise, it's about the team, not the individual, and they can focus on the learning. So for me, when a team has psychological safety, individuals can speak openly about anything. They're not afraid to share feedback or to challenge each other because they have a foundation of trust in place. That means when other individuals hear, their different point of view, they're not going to assume that they're being attacked or that this is like a personal offense. They can understand it's just about the work, and that, we all have enough trust kind of in the bank that we can have those kinds of difficult conversations. So this is very hard to achieve, just being frank. And we get in our own way in terms of this. So we would all love to work in a place that's judgment free, but that can be quite difficult. So what's kind of stopping us from having psychological safety? So when I first joined Google, which was like 2.5 years ago now, I think because it's a group of such high performing people, I've definitely seen that there is a sense of imposter syndrome there. There's so many talented people. And, when you first join, a lot of you might be saying, like I did, like, should I even be here? I'm meeting people who are like, oh, I founded Chrome in my spare time, or, like colleagues who are just so exceptional. And also a lot of us are perfectionists, myself included. And, we've done that over time in our careers. And that sometimes is driving this, fear of failure and this fear of imperfection. And, when you're kind of going into this environment and you're starting new in a new space, you can usually see that someone focused more on being accepted rather than being themselves, because we're human beings. Like, we're primarily driven to want to fit into a community, and we don't want to rock the boat necessarily. And so we won't be able to do that until we've built up like a sense of trust in the organization. So there's a few things, again, from Amy Edmondson, that she calls like impression management. And we kind of build this armor to protect ourselves and our reputation and our emotion, because it really holds us back. To give some specific examples, like we don't want to seem ignorant, so we don't ask questions. We don't want to seem incompetent, so we don't admit to our own weaknesses. We don't want to seem intrusive, to someone else's project, so we don't offer our ideas. We don't want to seem negative, so we don't challenge the status quo. But all of those things are essential for a team to function effectively and for them to make sure that they don't, push stuff live that's a mistake. Someone on the team might have had a good perspective to say, hey, that thing, I don't think that's going to land well because of my experience, in a certain space. So we have to create an environment where we can kind of fight our natural urge to want to be accepted and feel comfortable to just be ourselves. So specifically, I think a lot of this change sits with the manager. So I try to create psychological safety by building up the team empathy and trust and giving the team permission to fail. So earlier I introduced myself very quickly, but do you really know who I am? Like, could you trust me? Like, the level of introduction I gave you is often the level of introduction you get when you're meeting a new peer that you're supposed to collaborate with who's from a separate team. And I think team empathy is about getting to know each other and trusting each other and understanding the whole person and not just the work facade. And this really drives the human behavior for us to trust each other as people. So I feel like based on what you've seen so far, you don't know who I am and you probably can't trust me and you wouldn't be able to challenge me in a conversation. So I go beyond that and I get individuals in my team to share their whole selves. So we look at it from multiple lenses and we do lots of exercises to kind of get to know each other. One of these is this template, which is the Who Am I at Work? So everyone does the personality survey and then they share aspects of how they like to work. What are their communication norms? How do they like to receive feedback? This is literally mine. What are my weekly must-haves? What areas do I have as a person for personal growth? What are my strengths I'm happy to share, just so that everyone in the team gets to understand each other. Like, how do they like to operate in the workplace? What's the best way to engage with them? And we keep this as a resource so whenever anyone joins the team new, they can quickly get a library of their colleagues and understand, okay, well, I know that in this direct team, I'm working with Mel, I'm working with Ben, I want to understand them a little bit deeper, and I can use this as a resource. And then, so that's your work self. But I think it's really important to share who you are outside of work. So what we do is like a 5-minute presentation, get people to share some of their outside interests. I'm going to do mine very quickly for you here so you can kind of see the difference and how you've trusted me before and after this exercise. So I shared with you earlier that I'm Mel, but I love burgers. I'm obsessed with burgers. I collect them. I made that burger footstool. That's my first Android, my burger model. I'm now living in California. I just moved here from London and I've already sampled, X number of burgers. And that's just something that started from an early age and I'm known as Burger Mel. Then another aspect for me is I love making creative gingerbread. I compete with myself every year to make something more and more elaborate. You can see they're getting motorized and getting pretty intense, but it's fun and that's my Christmas project every year. Then another thing I love doing is spending time with my husband, Max, and my fur babies at home. And I got married a couple of years ago and had my dream wedding, which I absolutely loved. And then the other thing that I love doing is renovating property. So this just shows a few photos of some of our before and afters over in the UK, but we're now onto our 5th renovation. We kind of flip houses and absolutely love doing it. So that was a very flyby, and I would normally spend like a detailed 5 minutes kind of doing that. But I think there's a big difference, and you might have seen one thing there where we have like a shared interest or something that you've related to, or there's just something in there that if you and I met, we would be able to have a conversation about it. We would be able to build a connection about something that isn't work related. So then we would start to establish trust and build a relationship that is beyond the corporate kind of relationship. And that would make our work collaboration so much easier. So I'm trying to facilitate this to happen, which, you can do virtually. Like, this is all virtual kind of collaboration. So the other thing that we do in some of our team meetings is like using a warm-up tool. This is a really great one called TS Check. It's free, super easy website. You just go to it and you get this like auto-generating questions. So you can ask, basically go around the team meeting and ask these questions that make you just connect at a human level before you get stuck into the work mode. And this is just amazing to hear people speak, from a sense, and also just to hear from everyone in the room. It's quite hard to do that now when everyone's connecting virtually. Like the unmute button is quite scary for some people. So having an exercise where everyone gets an opportunity to speak will actually increase the amount of collaboration and contribution that you'll get in that meeting because they've warmed up to hitting unmute and speaking on the meeting in the beginning. Cool. And then another thing that we do is appreciation and compassion. So acknowledging and appreciating each other shows compassion, and that compassion towards each other supports and promotes this culture of respect and inclusion. Quite a lot of research has been done into like how compassion improves the collaboration in the workplace. So we run exercises where the team can express appreciation for something specific about a colleague or project. Google has a program of like peer bonuses where you can actually allocate money to your colleagues to say like you did something exceptional and I want you to be recognized for that. And that's kind of a public thing, and the team can comment on that and see that recognition. So it's kind of building that culture of appreciation for your colleagues. And then the final thing in this section is this permission to fail, which I think is just so important. And so what I try to do is reframe failures as learnings. And actually making failing something that's good, because if you fail quickly, you save your team a lot of time. So we try to introduce some of like tales of fail, where we share 5-minute stories of key failures that we actually want to celebrate, and to kind of humanize the concept of failing and making sure that people understand that failing is a good thing. It's about learning. It's about progressing. You can't develop and grow as a team or as an individual without failures. They're just parts of the journey. Cool. Okay, so the second pillar is cultivating diverse perspective. And in this, I'm focusing more on inclusive meetings. And I think, as a Google, I spend most of my time in meetings, even prior to COVID. And now, obviously, this is how we collaborate in this world. So if we make meetings inclusive, we go a long way to make the workplace inclusive, because it's the dominant way that people are able to contribute and collaborate with each other. So as a manager and leader, you're responsible for kind of adjudicating and ensuring that your meetings run well. And there's just some basic principles that I just don't see happen. And it's kind of like they're just foundational. So making sure that you have a meeting agenda and that there's clarity for attendees to say like what is their role going to be. Making sure that you actually are managing interruptions and dominance and seeing and like adjudicating contributions, and understanding that not everyone has to speak up, but everyone should have the opportunity. And it shouldn't just be them having to unmute and pushing themselves forward. You should actually go further than that and facilitate it. So just a couple of like details for that. This is probably sounding super obvious, but I'm shocked by how often like people don't have an agenda in a meeting. And I will actually decline meetings when there's no agenda, and I'll just add a note saying, I'm not sure what this meeting is for, please clarify, because people will show up to that meeting. They won't understand the purpose. They won't know how they're supposed to contribute. They won't have been able to get in the right frame of mind. And so it can be like a waste of time. So share the meeting purpose, the agenda, and even the materials in advance. And this is important because introverts especially take a long time, not long time, but a longer period of time than extroverts to feel comfortable to speak up about new information. And they generally, I'm an introvert, will take time to want to understand that information and process my thoughts and questions. And I usually don't do that directly in the same meeting where I'm consuming it for the first time. So circulating that in advance will dramatically increase the number of contributions that you get. And then afterwards, short, precise follow-up and notes and the key insights, the decisions and actions. You might have had everyone in that room, but they might have been busy. They might have had their child, distracting them. So it's like important to cap that information. And the amount of times that doesn't happen, like I can't hammer home enough times to say, like, just make sure that this is happening within your teams. Great. Okay. So how do you mitigate the bias within that room? So you can have a manager, or you can have like a moderator, like someone whose role is to actually facilitate. And what they can be doing is recognizing when an idea is shared by someone, and maybe when that idea isn't initially recognized, and then it's restated by another person. And that happens a lot, especially to women and people from minority backgrounds. They aren't heard when they say something, and then a colleague, especially a male white colleague, then restates that idea, and then it's listened to. So you can make sure that what we're saying is, giving the ownership of that idea back to the person. Yes, I see you're building on Sasha's idea. We heard that earlier. And just calling out interruptions as well when you see them, and return the floor back to people. I do that a lot. It does feel uncomfortable in the beginning, but I'll literally say, I'm sorry, Tom. I believe Sasha was still finishing her point, and let them continue. The worst offenders need to be pulled aside, and they need to be told that they're doing this. I'd say 95% of the time that I've done that, they don't know that they're doing that. And I think people assume they're doing it intentionally, but it's like a very unconscious thing most of the time. So we have to give them the benefit of the doubt and give them the feedback like, hey, you are interrupting certain individuals within these forums, and can you please be more conscious of it? Okay, then this is an important piece for me, which is, how do we give everyone a voice? Not all of us are happy to speak up. That is the fact, especially on virtual meetings. Like, as I've said already a few times, the unmute button is pretty daunting for some of us. So what I do in my meetings is create ways for those who are more introverted to always be able to contribute. So we usually have an online doc where everyone is typing input, or when I facilitate my design crits, I have everyone put notes into our virtual whiteboard, which is called Jamboard. And everyone's adding post-it notes while the presenter is doing their session. And then we go through the list alphabetically, and everyone gets a chance. I say, hey, it's your turn. They unmute and they say whether they have input or not. And so they all get a nominated place to speak. And that is really important, so that they know that they're going to have a chance to contribute, and they don't have to feel uncomfortable. They know that when their turn is going to come, and they all get that opportunity. Or another way that you can do it, which works really well. So say we finish a presentation and you want questions. We take 2 minutes, quiet time, play some music or something, and we say, everyone take those 2 minutes to write questions and post them in the chat. You will get 10x the number of questions and input than you would just asking people to have a free-flowing conversation, because you all get nominated time to think about something, and an easy way to write and put that into the public space. So these are just like simple tips, but really do make a difference in terms of how many people contribute. Cool. And then another final part here is active listening. So most of the time in a workplace, when you people are listening, but they're listening to respond. Like, they're listening to someone speak, and they're thinking the whole time in their head, okay, well, how am I going to reply to this? And that is not active listening. That is kind of a passive way of listening with an agenda and a bit of bias built into it. And so trying to get your teams to practice active listening, so that they understand the difference between listening to respond versus listening to understand. Listening to understand is where you're not using your subconscious voice to actually think about your response. You're just listening and doing internal inquiry about what the person is saying, and actually trying to hear them. So you can get your team to pair up and kind of get them to do an exercise where they take turns. They each describe a problem for 2 minutes without any interruption from the other person. And the other person knows they can't speak, so they have to practice for 2 minutes just listening. And trust me, find it very, very hard, but it's quite a good exercise to help people see the difference between active and passive listening. All right, so my final pillar here is around providing equal opportunities. So for this, we really have to bust our own bias. And what I like to view this as is bias without blame. Literally, everyone has bias. It's human nature, but this is okay as long as we take the time to understand and manage them. Common biases that, I've had in the past is like, we tend to favor people we like, and we tend to give opportunities to those we deem competent. And when we say people we tend to like are people who look similar to us, and those we deem competent, like show the typical signs of competency, and that you might not deem to someone who maybe who's just come back from leave or who hasn't yet had the opportunity to show the skill of that task. And so they're not necessarily given the opportunity to grow in that space. So something that Google does really well is all managers and decision makers who are involved in anything relating to performance and promotions have to do mandatory unconscious bias training. And when we have those conversations, we have someone whose role there is purely to bust bias. Like they come into that meeting and that's their job, is to look for any bias that's at play, to call out comments that are made, to say, sorry, like that should not be stated. We don't need to know the purpose of someone's leave. You can just say they were on leave. But there's lots of ways that your bias buster can be important in these forums. And then there's an important thing to understand here when, as a manager, about the dynamics of your workplace. And there's this kind of mantra: if you don't ask, you don't get. And I kind of preach this statement to the London Tech Ladies Network that you need to stand up, you need to ask, you need to assume that your manager or leader won't be automatically recognizing you for something. This is just the reality. Those who speak loudest tend to get things. And traditionally, women grow up, and the way that society speaks to them tells them, hey, you need to be quiet. If you just work hard, you'll get recognized for what you're doing, which just isn't actually how our environment operates. Those who ask and demand and negotiate get more. Like that is just the reality of how things work. So as a manager, you can kind of counter that if you understand that that's the reality. A good stat that talks about this is from the HP Hewlett-Packard report. They did research within their own organization, and they saw that when they had internal jobs up, that men would apply for the job when they met about 60% of the qualifications, so just over half of the bullet points on the job description. And women would only apply if they met every single bullet point. I've definitely experienced this. So I met a CEO, and he told me about how he had a woman who wanted to apply for a role on the board. And she cited like 3 specific examples on page 3 of the job description. She said, I just don't have job experience for these, so I feel like I'm not going to be qualified. And then he later asked the man who accepted the role what he thought of those same requirements. And he said he never even made it to page 3. He just liked the sound of the role and accepted it. So, we can be our biggest, internal kind of reason for why we don't stand up for these things. But as a manager, you can counter that. So if you just work with the reality of assuming that people on the team are too uncomfortable to ask, they will be, but they do want more. So how can you empower managers and leaders to assume that by default and make it their duty to ask themselves to go out and find out each person's truth and their goals? So I do that through very well facilitated career development. This is literally the screenshot of the template. I'm sure each team member has a super structured career plan so that they are able to state their motivations, state their growth areas, and what kind of projects they're looking for. So there's no ambiguity in understanding what this individual wants in the workplace. Part of this is a good exercise to look at what is motivating that individual. And this is an exercise that you can do on your own. You don't need your manager to help facilitate. But you basically just say, hey, I've got 100 points to spend. How do I spend them over these certain areas? Which of these are important to me? And this is a good exercise for you to figure out, like, what's going to drive my behavior over the next 6 months? What should I be focusing on? And then the rest of the career document is basically looking at what is the job you really want in 5 years from now? What new skills should you be learning now to springboard you into that job? And then what are the 5 SMART goals that we're going to actually implement today that will measure over the next 6 months to help you kind of work on those goals? And importantly, like, who are your stakeholders and peers who you have to give visibility so that you can actually make that job happen in reality, and like tracking those people. And then my last point in this is just to be conscious of all the work that you and the team are doing, and that noticing that the smaller contributions, they often go unnoticed. So keeping an eye out for those smaller but nonetheless valuable contributions that don't get like the prime spot in presentations and all hands and things. And out also for how smaller non-promotable tasks are being delegated. So this is really interesting, where office housework, which is basically tasks like ordering the food or booking the meetings or taking the notes. Like those are all non-promotable tasks that take up time. And research from the Harvard Business Review shows that certain groups of people, including women, people of color, are much more likely to volunteer or be assigned this kind of work. And that literally hurts their careers. Because they have less time for promotable tasks. So to counter that, just making sure you're conscious of who is completing that office housework, making schedules and rotating the tasks, that is a way to make sure that it's fair and unbiased, because those things do need to happen, but they can be shared evenly by the team. And those were the 3 pillars of the talk today. I hope you got some value out of that. I love sharing this message. I hope there's a couple of actionable points there that you can bring back to your teams, whether you're a manager or an individual. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Melanie, very much. I actually quite enjoyed that, to be honest with you. I'm being serious. I think there's some things that are interesting in there that I didn't hear is especially about the 100% to 60% stat that you had there. I honestly, I'd never heard that, and I found that very interesting. So thank you again for your time and joining us here. And hopefully one day you can join us in Cluj, because it's a great time.
I would love to. I would absolutely love to.
And I'm not gonna lie, I'm in Pennsylvania and I could go for a burger right now. So thank you for that, because that really just brightened my day. I'm definitely gonna have one now. So thank you again for being here, Melanie. I'm just gonna have some remarks before we go to a little break. So
okay.
hope to see you again soon. Thank you.